But based on everything
They
you just
arrested
mentioned,
Trump's lawyers, his accountants, his media support system, and even his valet. The FBI, before they indicted his valet because he wouldn't cooperate and turn against Trump, they actually coached him to appear sweaty so that it looked like he was out for a jog rather than meeting secretly with the feds. They went after every aspect of it.
From Fox News, Trump floats using the Insurrection Act to combat Chicago crime. Says Pritzker should beg for his help. Right now in Chicago, it is being argued that the feds are defying court orders. In Portland, we are seeing stories about conservatives being arrested despite being the victims. One man struck in the head with a rock, falls to the ground, goes to the hospital, and gets arrested while in the hospital. What is going on? I think it's patently obvious to anyone who's paying attention. The lines are dividing. The lines have been drawn a long time ago, but the division is getting worse. Democrats are acting like feds are an invasive, illegal occupationary force because they don't recognize the authority of government. They don't need to say it. Actions speak louder than words. Now, joining us to give us a breakdown of just how bad it really is, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mike Benz. Let's pull this up, make sure we've got the everything working. Testing, 1, 2, 3. It looks like we're pretty good. So we'll be starting this up. It sounds like we're good. I think we are. Sometimes the audio gives us issues. I see Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Tim.
How are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fairly well. We've got some crazy stories over the past week, and I know that you've been tracking a lot of this deep state stuff. But one thing that we're seeing now, we were just talking about, is in Chicago, activists and the media are now alleging that federal law enforcement have begun to defy the courts using tear gas and pepper balls despite a court order barring them from doing so. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter, because we are seeing, again, in Portland, they're arresting conservatives, they're arresting partisans. It looks to me like when you go back to the arrest of Donald Trump, the arrest of his lawyers, the accusation that he was a traitor, not to mention everything you've covered, this divide is, we are looking through the glass at an opposition force in this country that I would describe as a separate nation. Actually, to be fair, this is the words of Stephen Marsh, who wrote the book, The Second Civil War, where he said you have a multicultural democracy and a constitutional republic inside the United States. With everything you've covered, USAID, all of the funding of this, I'm curious what you see as happening and where you think it'll go.
I think that's right. Street protests and paramilitary violence or damage to property is a very important subcomponent of political pressure applied by the uniparty blob fixture, both abroad and at home. We know that, for example, when aspects of the U.S. State Department or intelligence agencies or Department of War want to destabilize and empower government, the first thing they do is they use this gene-sharp color revolution, people-powered revolution. Literally, it's a textbook. It's called From Dictatorship to Democracy. It's translated in something like 128 different languages and dialects and given out to protesters. And usually the front lines are the dispossessed in the country. They get a coalition of the fringes together. They get the unemployed people, the drug addicts, young people, union members, criminals. Literally, there's a CIA manual from 1983 on using organized crime for street protests. And I thought it was very interesting, since Antifa is obviously the central theme around these groups. There's an Antifa blog called Crime Think, which when Trump announced that he would be declaring Antifa a terrorist organization, they put out this kind of article, almost white paper type analysis, saying that they weren't yet sure how Trump would enforce the executive order, whether they would go bottom up, cell by cell through all the different Antifa cells, or whether they would go top down against, quote, massive liberal foundations and endowments, which I thought was an interesting tell. It's like Antifa self-reporting about their own structure, that while they purport to be kind of decentralized cell networks. It's all top down from money from these massive liberal foundations.
We're getting like a weird demonic feedback from you where it's like, I don't know if you notice that every few seconds, there's like your voice is replicating at a lower octave. I don't know.
Well,
we'll fight through it.
I told your producer something. I just moved into a new apartment and I don't have Wi-Fi yet, so it doesn't arrive till tomorrow. The router, so I'm on 5G in a empty, unfurnished apartment. So there's probably both echo and lag. So apologies for that.
Yeah. Well, we'll fight through it. Seeing these, the in Portland, there's this video from Andy No, and we've heard about Nick Sorter getting attacked and then the police arrest him. I've tried explaining to these conservatives they need to understand the ideology of this left liberal multicultural democracy, whatever you want to call it. When they say that they are going to by any means necessary, they mean it. And this assumption that you can trust the law enforcement in jurisdictions controlled by these people, it's crazy that people think they're going to go to Portland. You are going into Antifa country, and when you get attacked by Antifa, you walk up to Antifa wearing a badge and say, "Mr. Antifa in a badge, will you help me?" And they laugh and they arrest you. I think it should be patently obvious to anybody when they arrested Trump's lawyers for simply trying to defend him. We are in a whole new territory. But based on everything you just mentioned,
Trump's lawyers, his accountants, his media support system, and even his valet. The FBI, before they indicted his valet because he wouldn't cooperate and turn against Trump, they actually coached him to appear sweaty so that he was it looked like he was out for a jog rather than meeting secretly with the feds. They went after every aspect of it. But to your point, Tim, think about Letitia James, another one of these, Soros-associated fair and just prosecutions, this FJP group, which runs through the Tide Center and the Soros networks. Letitia James is a career criminal. Her whole family, it just came out yesterday that not only was she involved in mortgage fraud and has been indicted for that, but in the fraud home. And the irony of all ironies, she indicted Trump on effectively housing fraud for inflating the value of Mar-a-Lago, which was an insane case, while she was committing mortgage fraud herself, at least according to the court documents. But it turns out now, allegedly, she had a niece staying in that house as a fugitive from charges in, I believe it was North Carolina, for grand larceny, burglary, and child abuse. So you have career criminals who are the career prosecutors in these jurisdictions.
I can only predict that based on what we've seen over the past 10 years, what we're seeing today, it's fairly obvious. I don't know how this goes any other way, but, well, let me lighten up. Civil war is the buzz phrase that everyone's been saying for some time. I mean, Trump took a bullet inside of his head. Charlie Kirk was murdered. But there's also the possible of revolution or, I don't know what maybe revitalization. And that is massive changes coming. Either the right coalition crushes the left coalition crushes the right, or there's an active kinetic conflict. I'm curious what you think happens.
I actually think a lot of it is downstream of the money. And I think that when you look at Antifa's operations, for example, the fact that Antifa was on the ground in Syria, and according to Rolling Stone, the closest ally of the Department of War on the ground during the CIA's Operation Timber Sycamore. You look at Antifa's actions in Germany, assisting the Victoria Nuland blob against the AfD party, or Antifa in France, assisting the Biden blob, the Biden-Obama blob against Marine Le Pen. You look at Antifa becoming this giant sort of vaccine enforcement mob that was breaking up anti-vax things. You look at their climate change orthodoxy. You can go to YourAnon Central, the anonymous group account on Twitter with millions of followers that is kind of this unofficial voice from the ether of Antifa. And every single one of the political opponents that Antifa has is an opponent of George Soros, of Joe Biden, of Barack Obama. And it's also an enforcement mechanism for their financial ecosystem. And I think this is a major, major thing to track as the Treasury is looking to sanction these groups internationally and prevent, as they're being designated essentially an international terrorist group, which I think is the right way to go about it, because this is an international network who explicitly endorses violence. But that has been harbored within our own international facing agencies. I did a stream recently on the U.S. Institute of Peace, which has many of these figures in their street mob organizing. They call it the Nonviolent Action Program, but it explicitly endorses violence. It says we don't consider property destruction, arson, blowing up pipelines, destroying police precincts. We don't count that as, quote, violent action. And so they greenlit the director of the U.S. government agency. This is Maria Stephan and Erica Chenoweth, all these folks who are closely associated with this Antifa organizing network. They explicitly endorse property violence and even encourage folks to have, quote, a high risk tolerance to get arrested. So they look for people who are willing to get arrested. Of course, they have a support system through the National Lawyers Guild to pay for their legal fees, to bail them out. We saw the Attorney General of the entire state of Minnesota holding up the Mark Bray Antifa handbook while he's in charge of the entire criminal justice system in Minnesota, where the George Floyd riots popped off. How do you think that filters down into the local prosecutors when the Attorney General of the entire state is holding up the Antifa handbook? And Mark Bray, who wrote that handbook and tried to flee the country this week and was stopped.
He was stopped
Right, but his parting words on Blue Sky were to continue the resistance, quote, legal or not.
What do you,
and these are the people in charge of the legal system.
What do you mean he was stopped? What happened?
Well, he tried to flee to Spain.
Yeah.
And I think he was turned back at the airport. I don't know what the status of that is currently, but last week he announced that he was fleeing to Spain. And I think because he's likely under FBI investigation, I don't know if they put a pause on his passport and took him in for questioning, but this was widely reported in the news. They reported him as I think a Rutgers professor, or I forget which university, maybe even Northeastern, but you see this. There's this money network, and it starts at the hedge funds and the private equity funds, and they sponsor the political class. They sponsor your Barack Obamas, your Joe Bidens, but they also invest region by region in all the different industries and businesses that Antifa serves to support. Think about this. When Antifa goes and breaks up an anti-Pfizer protest, who is that good for? George Soros has massive investments in companies like AstraZeneca and J&J, and massive investments in the climate space. I reported this in Brazil, for example, where these pro-Lula mobs break up Bolsonaro meetings. Well, the first thing Lula did after being backed by the State Department and these George Soros networks was to implement these ethanol mandates so that you, by force of the government, you had to buy from companies, portfolio companies that the George Soros Management Fund had already taken giant long investments in. So Soros made about $185 million through his management fund simply for installing a candidate who forced people to buy the products and services of George Soros companies. You see the same thing with the Al Gore climate. Al Gore is a multi-billionaire now because of his hedge fund that basically takes these positions on climate investments. Bill Gates has the same, his Breakthrough Ventures, which is a major climate fund, and you have these Antifa, eco-fascist, eco-fascist terrorism types who are doing this work through Antifa. I think if you shut down the money at the university level, and Trump is trying to do this through this university compact and hedging the grants, $9 billion in grants were owed to the Harvard endowment effectively or Harvard University until Trump just cut off about $7 billion of that, $400 million to Columbia, $2 billion to Yale. All of this funds the professoriate class who teaches the theory. These teachers double as organizers. For example, Mark Bray, who wrote the Antifa handbook, that Keith Ellison was holding up, and Mark Bray openly on social media saying engage in these actions, legal or not.
Yep.
He is doubling as a professor and an organizer of the students. Michael Lodenthal is another great example of this. And so if you take the money out, I think the ideology actually changes very quickly.
There's an update. So I did pull it up. Mark Bray had attempted to flee to Spain. However, his boarding passes, they got everything checked in, got their boarding passes, got to the gate. Reportedly, the reservations were then canceled. He called it fishy. He was turned back, rebooked a day later. He did make it to Spain. But it is curious as to why he was initially turned back. And I have to, they're investing. I mean, Glenn Beck said that the FBI came to his house and sat down with him for, I think, several hours to go over what he knows about these organizing groups. And it's fascinating because there was I was talking about this earlier, a podcast from The Bulwark. And this is what we see from these liberals. They mocked Glenn Beck for talking with the FBI about Antifa, but offered up no rebuttal or criticism other than to just laugh. It's the weirdest thing, the world these people live in. They say, haha, Glenn Beck met with the FBI. They'll start laughing. Wow, he's so dumb. The FBI is so dumb. Haha. They didn't actually tell me why it was wrong or what was going on. And so what I end up seeing, you make a great point with the that Antifa becomes the enforcer of all things the blob, the machine state. There was a anti-mask protest. There was protesters who said mask mandates are wrong. Antifa physically attacked them, started punching these people. Why is Antifa going out and beating up some random old guy who doesn't want to wear a mask? It makes no sense. These people are on the left. They rally in ignorance. Maybe it's because they lack the ability or they're just scared and they fall in line. But with that being said, I don't see a reality where we escape this without some escalation of conflict. And that could be maybe Trump forcefully occupies the blue states and declares an insurrection and takes command of their criminal justice apparatus. Or Trump, come 2026, Democrats win the midterms, impeach Trump again. It largely does nothing. A Democrat wins in 28, and then we're all in prison or something like that. Or maybe both sides refuse to back down. And when Trump tries to occupy a blue state, they say no and they shoot back. Do you think we avoid this? Do you think I'm wrong? I mean, to be fair, it's very broad what I'm describing.
Right. Well, these are plausible scenarios. I think that there is a middle path through, which is instead of the helium in the balloon getting so intense that the whole thing pops, there is, I think, a way to let air out of the balloon simply by squeezing the money supply. And this is sort of the strategy that I'm articulating here. And I think there's lots of ways to do this. So one of the things that's really fascinating about this network is how much it simulates clandestine, what do they call it? Networked clandestine, I'll just call it clandestiny. Network clandestiny, this concept that Michael Lodenthal, this major Antifa professor, talks about. And it's very interesting just to come back to this Spain thing. In Spain, this is another major blob node. The blob has been trying to stop the Vox party in Spain by any means possible, in large part because of the energy policy advocated by the Spanish Vox party. Spain is one of the major ports through which LNG is transported, this transition fuel away from oil. And they say that that gas is effectively this transport through on the way to clean energy. And so part of bombing the Nord Stream pipeline, part of the strategy for many of these major gas companies was to play on liquefied natural gas, where you have all this Houston gas that can be transported through LNG to ports in Spain, Portugal, and Poland. Those are the major hubs to take the market that Russia used to have. And you'll note these Antifa networks are all, Trump equals Putin. They're magically, while they have folks saying, Putin is bringing back communism and the like, and authoritarian. Suddenly, they're not opposed. They're completely aligned with the CIA on that. But what I'll note on Spain is The Blob has run operations against the right-wing populist Vox party in Spain for a very long time now. In fact, the same forces in Poland, Anne Applebaum, who was almost the first lady of Poland, she's married currently to the foreign minister, their head of the State Department, Radek Sikorski, who, as soon as the Nord Stream pipeline was bombed, creating a massive market in Spain, because now instead of Russian gas, they'd have to ship in LNG through Spain. Radek Sikorski in Poland tweeted out, "Thank you, USA." And it just came out today, Tim, today. Poland instructed the German government to stop its investigation of the Nord Stream pipeline bombing.
Wow.
This is an incredible thing, because the Germans arrested a Ukrainian diving team, and they don't want Germany to get to the real answer of who exactly, how deep it goes, given, for example, that U.S. intelligence took over Ukrainian intelligence in 2014, as reported by the New York Times, day one post-Maidan coup. They don't want Germany investigating who was complicit in the Nord Stream pipeline. And it's the same folks who are involved in Spain. But Radek Sikorski's wife, Anne Applebaum, who's on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, one of the biggest CIA fronts in the entire United States arsenal, she ran this operation in 2015 called the Integrity Initiative, where they had this, they called it a network of networks, which is the exact phrase that Michael Lowenthal uses in his book, The Politics of Attack, this Antifa guidebook on Antifa tactics, promoting them. And it's a clandestine network of networks where they recruited decentralized cluster cells. This is literally in the orientation manual, where they gave strict OPSEC instructions to be, quote, helpfully uninformative about the leadership structure and the funding of the organization. And her group worked behind the scenes. This all came out publicly in these leaked documents to eliminate Pedro Baños, who was going to be the defense minister in Spain, and to run this covert operation to destroy his nomination. But what I'm saying is, this is something for the ODNI. If ODNI can pull, for example, 100% that the CIA and DOD worked with Antifa on the ground in Syria. I believe you will see, if you were to simply run a keyword search for anti-fascist or Antifa or any of the associated keyword terms in Germany, you will find the same thing under the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, as she ran the Biden administration's political section of the State Department. I think if you just pull all the political section at the state, all the USAID files in terms of groups that went to, quote, anti-fascist groups, you go to ODNI and you look at, for example, the CIA occupied the entire top floor of the State Department in the 20th century in the Paris office. I bet you will find the links in France. You will find the links in Switzerland. You will find the links. I think that if this network relies on clandestine, tight OPSEC in order to prevent public disclosure of leadership and funding, I believe they were a tool of statecraft. So in addition to the Treasury actions on sanctioning, in addition to the FBI and DHS actions at law enforcement, I believe you need effectively an Antifa files for the U.S. federal government, the same way we had MLK files and JFK files. And I believe that could destroy the network by simply making it all public. You know
that you were a target of the deep state a long time ago. You probably know better than I do, but the first time we had you on Timcast IRL, to me it was uneventful. Let me explain. I get a notification from our booking team. We're having Mike Benz on. It's a mundane, routine day. Here's our guest. Here's his expertise. I'm not saying anything about you being mundane. I'm saying just another day, just another guest. I got, in the weirdest way, a bunch of tweets, even DMs, from people who were somewhat associated with either left-wing activism or groups that told me not to have you on the show. Some of them were things like, "You're actually having that guy on your show? Did you even look into it? Oh my God." And I was weirded out by this because I'm like, you've not given me an argument. And certainly Mike Benz is not the most shocking and controversial person we've ever booked for the show. But some of these individuals were Antifa-aligned liberal people that I've known since like Occupy, sending me DMs. And they were trying to insinuate that there was some kind of, this is weird. I've never gotten the reaction to any guest the way the reaction I got to you with these activists messaging me with no real stance, grounds, or political argument as to why I should not have you on the show. And they were saying something like, LOL, Mike Benz, gross. Did you even look into him? As if to like make me worried about you being on. And I'm like, I don't care. Shut up. But it really seemed like a coordinated attack on me, trying to get me scared of some kind of backlash or cancellation to you appearing on the show. Of course, was a totally normal show where you laid out a lot of these positions, the investigation and the work that you've done. I think seeing all of this, it is part of this network, a coordinated effort. And I'll put it this way. A lot of people talk about, oh, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that on the internet. If you say a certain word, they'll ban you. No. There were a few instances where you would get really banned. There have been only a few experiences I've had where you can tell. Eric Ciaramella was one of them. Yeah. When Trump was accused, and real clear investigations reported the accuser must be Eric Ciaramella. If you said his name on YouTube, they would delete the video instantly. On Facebook, you
couldn't say on Twitter either. Yeah.
If on Facebook you wrote Eric Ciaramella, the post would vanish instantly. And then to a lesser degree, the strange experience I had was when you were booked for the show for the first time, all of these weird people popping out of the woodwork trying to get me to not have you on the show. Have you experienced more than that?
Well, it's so funny because they're afraid of losing the money. There are folks who sense that I'm close with the admin in terms of them following my account and many of the NGOs getting defunded that I've been naming. But what's the strangest thing was, I think the first time I was on your show was probably early 2024-ish, and during the transition, maybe 2023. But during the transition, I had about a half dozen NGO representatives reach out to me and plead for their lives, effectively plead for their funding lives, saying, I know that we've done some things wrong and in the past, but we can, bring our organization into alignment, as long as we have the grants and capacity to do it. And so I think a lot of this just comes down to the money, which is that they have relied on weasel words and lie language. And my job has been to decode that for policymakers. But Tim, they went after you in an unbelievable way. I don't know if you've seen some of the extent of it. I posted a video a while back about how you were targeted during the 2020 election using AI scan and ban technology. You were targeted by the Atlantic Council, which has 7 CIA directors on its board, and annual funding from the Pentagon, the State Department, USAID, and the National Endowment for Democracy. The Atlantic Council, Graphica, the University of Washington, and the Stanford Internet Observatory fingered you and actually gave a case study of how you amplified a major narrative about what was it? I think it was ballot harvesting. And they used this AI. It was available, and Facebook kind of shut it down as it's moved over to this more free speech oriented model. But they used to have this open source for outside researchers. These are all operatives. So that you could use this essentially AI tool as an API to get the internal effectively narrative tracking. So you could track if Donald Trump Jr. Tweeted out a tweet about a narrative, you could get the origin of who he retweeted it from and who they retweeted it from, who they quote tweeted it from, and you could create this whole narrative network map. And they fingered you as the moment that this narrative around ballot harvesting went from sort of fringier accounts to hit like this giant mainstream that amplified its way to the White House. And they essentially said, this is the class that we need to cut off. They were very concerned at the time in 2020, before Trump got formally banned in early 2021, about what they called the martyr effect. They felt like they didn't have the political capital to nuke Donald Trump's account or Don Jr.'s account. Yeah. And so they commissioned actually, they had National Science Foundation funds to study how to minimize the quote, the martyr effect, or effectively the Streisand effect from censoring someone. And they came up with top-down models, bottom-up models, random partial ban things where they would create this network and they'd say, okay, well, we can't ban Trump, but here are the top lieutenants that he retweets from, and here are the giant sort of tranches of small accounts that nobody knows and doesn't have brand recognition. So if we censor 65% of the small accounts, but we keep the top accounts, we can kill the amplification funnel. And this is probably the only thing stopping Nick Storter from being in jail right now. If you remember, the Portland police made a tweet. We understand that there's been an arrest warrant against an individual with a large number of social media followers. That's probably the only reason they dropped the case, was because of the blowback from that.
One last thing before we wrap is it's amazing to hear you say this, because this is exactly what I predicted was happening following the 2018 mass censorship of conservatives. What we saw was overnight recommendations dropped by like 90%. And what I explained to people was what they're engaging in is a pressure system where they don't want to ban every conservative outright, because that would create a massive backlash. What they want to do is play a math game. We call this in poker EV plus EV, expected value positive or negative. They want to create a system by which they tilt the scales so that over a long enough period of time, the left ideology expands and the right contracts. So instead of just outright banning all the conservatives, every month you ban a small conservative and restrict their ability to communicate. I actually think recently the views on my Timcast News channel skyrocketed. Subscribers started growing. And it was after I pointed out that I believed my channel. So it was like a month ago, I said, I believe legacy censorship weights still exist on my channel from the Biden administration.
Yes.
What happened? 2 weeks later, my views doubled, which indicates someone at Google heard me say it, went and checked, because this happened before in, I think it was 2021. You couldn't Google search Timcast IRL or Timcast. The YouTube videos wouldn't come up. I mentioned it on the show. On the show at that moment, you could all of a sudden search for Timcast again. So we are definitely over time. So, Mike, where can people find you?
You can find me on X at Mike Ben Cyber, also on YouTube, Rumble, Instagram, everywhere it's Mike Ben Cyber. And even that, I'll just say, final thing, Tim, Google is competing right now. This comes down to the money, too. They paid Trump $25 million as a settlement for his account being banned. They've let other accounts like London Real back on. But a lot of this is because of the money. They're competing for government contracts against XAI and ChatGPT, and Google doesn't want to be on the outs. So it comes down to the money, honey, and that's what's got to we have to go after with Antifa now.
Right on, Mike. I appreciate you chiming in. We'll have you back soon. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks, Tim.
Have a good one.
You too.
That is the great Mike Benz. Man, that guy knows all about what's going on with the deep state machine, and he's been right for a long time. I thought he was on a while ago. It might have been a year or two ago. I am fully cognizant of the audio issues. What I think was happening was he's in an echoey room, and I think that when he would talk, the echo would bounce back somewhat after the fact. But if his mic has got a noise gate threshold to pick up audio, it would only pick it up when he talked, creating that weird recurring echo. We had the problem with my voice echoing before, and it turned out it was on our end. We fixed that problem. So we're going to go in, and because it was on the low end, I can easily pull that out with the parametric equalizer. So I apologize for that. Smash the like button, everybody. Stay tuned. More to come. Thank you to everybody in the Rumble Morning lineup. I believe we've got Devori Darkins going live now. Let's get that raid. Guys, I really recommend Devori. He is absolutely amazing. Smart guy, great show. Definitely check him out if you haven't seen him before. The raid is gearing up. Thanks for hanging out. We're back tonight at 8 p.m. for Timcast IRL. Follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast, and we will see you all then.